unchanged and at normal levels, indicating no external radiological impact on the population or the environment there. However, within the Natanz facility, there is both radiological and chemical contamination. It is possible that uranium isotopes contained in uranium hexafluoride, uranyl fluoride, and hydrogen fluoride are dispersed inside the facility. The radiation, primarily consisting of alpha particles, poses a significant danger if inhaled or digested. This risk can be effectively managed with appropriate protective measures, such as using respiratory devices. The main concern inside the facility is chemical toxicity. Fordow is Iran's main enrichment location for enriching uranium at 60%. The agency is not aware of any damage at Fordow at this time. At the Esfahan nuclear site, 4 buildings were damaged in last Friday's attack. The Central Chemical Laboratory, a uranium conversion plant, the Tehran reactor fuel manufacturing plant, and the enriched uranium metal processing facility, which was under construction. No increase of off-site radiation levels was reported. In Natanz, the main concern here is chemical toxicity. The CONDAB heavy water research reactor under construction in Arak was hit on the 19th of June. As the reactor was not operational and it did not contain any nuclear material, no radiological consequence is expected. The nearby heavy water production plant is also assessed to have been hit. And similarly, no radiological consequence is expected. As stated in the IEA's update of 18th June, at the Tehran Research Center, 1 building where advanced centrifuge rotors were manufactured and tested was hit. At the Karaj workshop, 2 buildings where different centrifuge components were manufactured were destroyed. There was no radiological impact internally or externally. Let me now refer to the Bushehr nuclear power plant. This is the nuclear site in Iran where the consequences of an attack could be most serious. It is an operating nuclear power plant, and as such, it hosts thousands of kilograms of nuclear material. Countries of the region have reached out directly to me over the past few hours to express their concerns, and I want to make it absolutely and completely clear. In case of an attack on the Bushehr nuclear power plant, a direct hit would result in a very high release of radioactivity to the environment. Similarly, a hit that disabled the only 2 lines supplying electrical power to the plant could cause its reactor's core to melt, which could result in a high release of radioactivity to the environment. In the worst case, both scenarios would necessitate protective actions, such as evacuations and sheltering of the population, or the need to take stable iodine with a reach extending to distances from a few to several hundred kilometers. Radiation monitoring would need to cover distances of several hundred kilometers, and food restrictions may need to be implemented. Any action against the Tehran nuclear research reactor could also have severe consequences, potentially for large areas of the city of Tehran and its inhabitants. In such a case, protective actions would need to be taken. I continue to provide public updates about the developments at all these sites and their possible health and environmental consequences. The agency is, as Madam Undersecretary had kindly reminded, is and will remain present in Iran, and inspections there will resume as required by Iran's safeguards obligations under its NPT safeguards agreement as soon as safety and security conditions allow. In this context, let me restate that the safety of our inspectors is of utmost importance. The host country has a responsibility in this regard, and we expect every effort to be made to ensure that their security and their communication lines with the IAEA headquarters will be maintained. As stated in my most recent report to the agency's Board of Governors, and based on inspections conducted at the relevant facilities since then, Iran's uranium stockpiles remain under safeguards in accordance with Iran's comprehensive safeguards agreement. You may recall that more than 400 kilograms of this stockpile is uranium enriched up to 60% of uranium-235. It is essential that the agency resumes inspections as soon as possible to provide credible assurances that none of it has been diverted. Importantly, any special measures by Iran to protect its nuclear material and equipment must be done in accordance with Iran's safeguards obligation and the agency. Therefore, it is of paramount importance that the agency's inspectors are allowed to verify that all relevant materials, especially those enriched to 60%, are accounted for. Beyond the potential radiological risks, attacks on such materials would make this effort, of course, more difficult. Madam President, the IAEA has consistently underlined, as stated in its General Conference resolutions, that armed attacks on nuclear facilities should never take place and could result in radioactive releases with grave consequences within and beyond the boundaries of the state which has been attacked. I therefore, again, call on maximum restraint. Military escalation threatens lives and delays indispensable work towards a diplomatic solution for the long-term assurance that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. Madam President, the presence, support, analysis and inspections of technical experts are crucial to mitigating risks to nuclear safety and security. That is true during peacetime and even more so during military conflict. For the second time in 3 years, we are witnessing a dramatic conflict between two UN and IAEA member states in which nuclear installations are coming under fire and nuclear safety is being compromised. The IAEA, just as has been the case with the military conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, will not stand idle during this conflict. As I stated in this chamber just a few days ago, I am ready to travel immediately and to engage with all relevant parties to help ensure the protection of nuclear facilities and the continued peaceful use of nuclear technology in accordance with the agency mandate, including by deploying agency nuclear safety and security experts, in addition to our safeguards inspectors in Iran, wherever necessary. For the IAEA to act, a constructive professional dialogue is needed. I urge the members of this council to support us in making it happen sooner rather than later. The IAEA must receive timely and regular technical information about affected nuclear facilities and their respective sites. I urge in this regard the Iranian regulatory authorities to continue a constructive dialogue with the IAEA Incident and Emergency Center, which has been operating 24/7 since the beginning of this conflict. Nuclear facilities and material must not be shrouded by the fog of war. Yesterday, there was an incorrect statement to the media by an Israeli military official that the Bushehr nuclear power plant had been attacked. Though the mistake was quickly identified and the statement retracted, the situation underscored the vital need for clear and accurate communication, and the agency's unique role in providing it in a technically accurate and politically impartial way is obvious. Let me conclude by assuring the international community of the IEA's continued support at this very grave time. A diplomatic solution is within reach if the necessary political will is there. Elements for an agreement have been discussed. The IAEA can guarantee through a watertight inspection system that nuclear weapons will not be developed in Iran. They can form the basis of a long-standing agreement that brings peace and avoids a nuclear crisis in the Middle East. This opportunity should not be missed. The alternative would be a protracted conflict and a looming threat of nuclear proliferation that, while emanating from the Middle East, would effectively erode the NPT and the non-proliferation regime as a whole. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Grossi for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席。主席，我感谢你召开此次紧急公开会，感谢古特雷斯秘书长的发言，支持秘书长关于停火止战、重回外交谈判的呼吁。感谢迪卡洛副秘书长和格罗西总干事的通报。以色列和伊朗的军事冲突进入第8天，造成双方大量平民伤亡和设施损毁，令人痛心。如果冲突进一步升级，不仅冲突双方将遭受更大损失，地区国家也将深受其害。以色列的行为违反国际法和国际关系准则，侵害伊朗主权和安全，破坏了地区的和平稳定，中方予以明确谴责。中国国家主席习近平针对当前事态提出了4点主张。中国外交部长王毅同伊朗、以色列和地区国家外长分别通话。当前紧要关头，国际社会应进一步凝聚共识，全力劝和促谈，平息紧张局势。我讲4点。第一，必须立即停火止战。武力不是解决国际争端的正确方式，只会加剧仇恨和矛盾。越早实现停火，造成的损失才会越小。不能坐视地区局势滑向未知的深渊。冲突当事方，尤其是以色列，应当尽快停火，防止局势轮番升级，坚决避免战争外溢。第二，必须保障平民安全。无论任何时候，军事冲突中保护平民的红线都不能突破，无差别使用武力的行为都不可接受。冲突当事方应严格遵守国际法，坚决避免殃及无辜平民，避免攻击民用设施，并为第三国公民撤离提供便利。第三，必须坚持对话谈判。沟通对话是实现持久和平的正确路径。当前的冲突打断了伊朗核问题谈判进程。伊朗多处核设施遭到袭击，这开创了危险的先例，可能造成灾难性后果。要坚定政治解决伊朗核问题大方向不动摇，坚持通过对话谈判推动伊朗核问题重回政治解决轨道。中方欢迎英国、法国、德国外长 欧盟外交与安全事务高级代表同伊朗外长在日内瓦正在举行的会谈。第四，必须汇聚国际社会促和努力。中东不稳，天下难安。以伊冲突导致中东紧张局势骤然升级，也对全球安全造成严重冲击。近日，21个阿拉伯伊斯兰国家发表外长联合声明，共同呼吁停火止战，重启伊朗核问题谈判，维护地区持久和平。中方对此完全支持。国际社会，特别是对冲突当事方有特殊影响力的大国，要为推动局势降温做出努力，而不是相反。安理会作为维护国际和平与安全的首要机构，应当为此发挥更大作用。我们支持安理会及时采取必要行动。中方愿继续同各方加强沟通协调，凝聚合力，主持公道，为恢复中东地区和平发挥建设性作用。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Secretary General Guterres for his presence and thoughtful and compelling remarks. Secretary General, you spoke about a defining moment and our collective future, as well as collective responsibility. And we fully agree with you and your call to give peace a chance. And in that context, your appeal to end the fighting and return to negotiations. I'm also thankful to Undersecretary General Di Carlo for her complimentary briefing, as well as the briefing by Director General Grossi. We note in particular his view that diplomatic solution is within reach with necessary political will. Madam President, last Friday, the Council had an emergency session in the wake of Israel's military strikes, violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran in flagrant violation and contravention of the UN Charter and fundamental principles of international law. 1 week later, as a result of such irresponsible behavior, the situation has only exacerbated, with grave implications for regional and international peace and security. Pakistan strongly condemns the unjustified and illegitimate aggression by Israel. We stand in solidarity with the people of Iran. We unequivocally denounce the blatant attacks and military strikes carried out by Israel, which constitute a grave danger and a serious threat to the peace, security, and stability of the entire region and beyond, with serious implications. We offer our sincere condolences and sympathies to the brotherly people of Iran on the loss of life as a result of these unprovoked attacks. The ensuing humanitarian crisis and civilian toll on both sides is also deplorable. International humanitarian law must be complied by all sides. The attacks against nuclear facilities for peaceful purposes are deeply troubling. Such attacks contravene international law, the Charter of the UN, Statute of the IAEA, and relevant IAEA General Conference resolutions on the issue. It is the responsibility of the IAEA to clearly pronounce its legal position with regard to such attacks, as well as to report it to the Board of Governors and to the Security Council about the legal safeguards, safety and security implications of such attacks. The agency should fulfill that responsibility. Madam President, the latest crisis has aggravated the existing tensions in the region, arising from Israel's continuing ruthless assault on Gaza that has resulted in an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe for the innocent Palestinians, as well as its recurring violations of international law in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The Security Council bears primary responsibility to immediately stop this wanton aggression and hold the aggressor accountable for its actions. The Security Council must fulfill its duty and affirm the following. First, categorical rejection and condemnation of Israel's attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran since 13th of June and all actions that contravene international law and the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Second, play its due role to end the hostilities and promote de-escalation for achieving a comprehensive ceasefire before the situation spirals out of control and threatens the peace and stability of the entire region. Third, clear denunciation of the targeting of IAEA safeguarded nuclear facilities against the provisions of international law and the UN Charter as reflected in the UN Security Council resolutions, IAEA resolutions, and international humanitarian law, including the Geneva Conventions. The Security Council must implement its own resolution 487. Fourth, call for dialogue and diplomacy to promote a peaceful and lasting resolution of the crisis. Diplomacy must be given a chance. Madam President, regrettably, Israeli unlawful strikes against Iran came at the time of intense diplomatic engagement on Iran's nuclear issue. These illegal actions must not be allowed to scuttle that dialogue. Parties must swiftly return to the path of negotiations, which is the only viable means to reach a sustainable agreement regarding the Iranian nuclear program. We note the willingness expressed by the United States to keep the door for negotiations open. We also take note of the dialogue between the E3 and Iran. We hope that the diplomatic efforts and engagements will bear fruit. We reaffirm our long-standing position that all issues concerning Iran's nuclear program must be resolved peacefully through dialogue and diplomacy in accordance with the rights, international obligations, and responsibilities of all the parties concerned. At the same time, verification activities by the IAEA as the competent international technical organization mandated to implement respective safeguards obligations should continue unimpeded. The IAEA must continue its work in an impartial and apolitical manner to provide objective reporting and credible information regarding the issues under its purview. Madam President, this is a critical moment. The Security Council must fulfill its responsibility and facilitate peaceful resolution of disputes. Military means and coercion cannot bring about a lasting settlement. Dialogue and diplomacy, in full adherence to the principles of international law and the UN Charter, remain the only viable path to resolving this crisis. This Council must therefore unite in support of the Secretary General's call for end to fighting and return to negotiations and dialogue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, признательна гайанскому председательству за оперативную реакцию на просьбу России, Китая, Пакистана и Алжира о созыве данного заседания. Благодарим генерального секретаря ООН за его вступительное слово, а также заместителя генерального секретаря ООН по политическим вопросам и миростроительству и гендиректора МАГАТЭ за их брифинг. Госпожа председатель, ровно неделя прошла с начала эскалации Ирано-израильского конфликта, который Совет Безопасности обсуждал 13 июня. За это время мир облетели кадры ночного неба над Тель-Авивом и Тегераном и другими городами, освещенного всполохами десятков и сотен ракет. Апокалиптические предсказания стали реальностью. Люди в двух странах вынуждены прятаться в убежищах. С каждым днем растет число жертв среди мирного населения с обеих сторон. В результате закрытия воздушного пространства в регионе многие граждане третьих стран попали в ловушку и пытаются найти путь домой. Под ударом по-прежнему остаются мирные ядерные объекты Ирана, что может привести к новой доселе невиданной ядерной катастрофе. Совету Безопасности ООН, основному органу по поддержанию мира и безопасности, нельзя уходить от ответственности, и необходимо дать объективную оценку ситуации и отреагировать через соответствующее решение. Decision. Мы не можем отрицать очевидные факты. Именно Израиль совершил атаку на Иран в преддверии очередного раунда непрямых переговоров между Вашингтоном и Тегераном. Таким образом, Западный Иерусалим не только показал откровенное пренебрежение в отношении усилий, прилагаемых для поиска дипломатического решения вопросов вокруг иранской ядерной программы, но и продемонстрировал пренебрежение к своему ключевому союзнику, Соединенным Штатам, которые до последнего времени декларировали намерение выйти на компромиссные развязки по данному вопросу. Следует помнить, что иранская ядерная программа не тайна за 7 печатями, недоступная для взгляда международного сообщества. Ядерные установки и площадки в этой стране находятся под гарантиями МАГАТЭ и на постоянной основе подвергаются тщательным проверкам инспекторов агентства. Ни одно из его государств-членов не находится под более плотным контролем и приглядом. Иран строго соблюдает свои обязательства по ДНЯУ и соглашения о всеобъемлющих гарантиях. В докладах секретариата агентства нет ни слова о наличии распространенческих рисков. Получается, что Израиль пренебрег оценками профильного международного агентства, самозвольно назначив себя судьей, единолично принимающим решение о нанесении ударов по суверенной стране, без оглядки на устав ООН и международное право. Достаточно недавно на Ближнем Востоке уже был трагический прецедент вторжения в государство под предлогом якобы наличия у него оружия массового уничтожения, которое впоследствии так и не обнаружилось. Жаль, что Соединенные Штаты, продемонстрировавшие всему миру этот антипример в 2003 году и принеся страдания миллионам людей, не желают учиться на собственных ошибках. Сегодня они вновь вместе с Великобританией, Францией и Германией пытаются убедить всех в обоснованности измышлений о якобы вынашиваемых Тегераном планах обрести ядерное оружие. Нельзя забывать и о том, что нападение на Иран было совершено в тот момент, когда весь мир с содроганием смотрел на продолжающуюся в Газе рукотворную катастрофу. Осуждал продолжающуюся гуманитарную блокаду анклава и ждал конференцию высокого уровня в поддержку формулы двух государств под эгидой ООН в соответствии с резолюциями Генеральной Ассамблеи. Вместо того, чтобы вернуться к единственно возможному переговорному мирному решению по Палестине, израильское военно-политическое руководство повысило ставки и расширило географию конфликта в регионе. Возможно, расчет Западного Иерусалима состоит еще и в том, чтобы новой авантюрой отвлечь внимание мирового сообщества от преступлений своей армии в Газе и на Сбри. Фиксируем крайне опасные попытки втянуть в это противостояние третьи страны, что, как верно подметил генеральный секретарь ООН, имело бы колоссальные последствия не только для вовлеченных сторон, но и для целого региона и международного мира и безопасности в целом. Разделяем позицию генерального секретаря о необходимости избегать интернационализации конфликта. Госпожа председатель, нынешняя эскалация вокруг Ирана началась не вчера. Напав на эту страну, Израиль сначала получил точный пас от ряда западных государств. Слова, произносимые британскими, французскими и германскими дипломатами в высоких залах Совета Безопасности ООН и в Совете управляющих МАГАТЭ, не менее опасны, чем самое грозное оружие. Неприкрытый шантаж руководства агентства с тем, чтобы заставить его подготовить неоднозначную, так называемую всестороннюю оценку по иранской ядерной программе, проталкивание ангажированной антииранской резолюции Совета управляющих МАГАТЭ, все это сделало эти страны фактическими соучастниками израильской агрессии. Напомним, что именно этот доклад МАГАТЭ стал одним из обоснований нападения на Иран для израильского руководства. Показательны в этой связи циничные заявления канцлера ФРГ Мерца о том, что, цитирую, «Израиль делает за нас грязную работу». Конец цитаты. То, что на пусковые кнопки нажимают в Западном Иерусалиме, не избавляет Вашингтон, Лондон, Париж и Берлин от ответственности за происходящее. Россия считает продолжающиеся интенсивные атаки Израиля на мирные объекты в Иране совершенно недопустимыми и незаконными с точки зрения международного права. В результате этих безответственных действий создаются неприемлемые угрозы международному миру и безопасности. Ядерные объекты не могут быть целями ударов. Требуем от Западного Иерусалима немедленно прекратить налеты и атаки на Иран, прежде всего на ядерные объекты, находящиеся под защитой МАГАТЭ. Ожидаем от руководства агентства подготовки в кратчайшие сроки развернутого письменного доклада и регулярных докладов для рассмотрения в Совете управляющих МАГАТЭ и Совете безопасности ООН с честными оценками ущерба, причиненного ядерно-энергетическому комплексу Ирана, а также применению гарантий агентства в этой стране, в том числе в контексте нахождения там инспекторов, чья жизнь подверглась смертельной угрозе. Отмечаем четкие заявления иранской стороны о ее неизменной приверженности обязательствам по дню и готовности к возобновлению контактов с Вашингтоном для выработки возможных решений, снимающих любые необоснованные подозрения и предубеждения в отношении ядерной программы Тегерана при условии прекращения израильских нападений. Поддерживаем такой настрой. Разделяем призыв генерального секретаря к немедленной деэскалации, ведущей к прекращению огня. Твердо убеждены, что урегулирование может быть надежно обеспечено только путем дипломатии и переговоров. Цели ядерного нераспространения, фундаментальной основой которой является ДНЯО, не должны и не могут быть достигнуты путем агрессии и ценой невинных жертв. Уверены, что решение, при котором будут одновременно не поставлены под сомнение права Ирана на мирную атомную деятельность и обеспечена безусловная безопасность еврейского государства, возможно. Доводили такие варианты до наших американских и израильских коллег, а также иранских партнеров. Готовы оказать им необходимое содействие в поиске устраивающей всех формулы. У нас пока еще есть шанс избежать новой разрушительной войны, которая будет иметь непредсказуемые последствия для всего региона и мира в целом. Готовы к поиску соответствующих решений в Совете Безопасности ООН и конструктивному взаимодействию со всеми, кто действительно выступает за дипломатию и диалог. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I wish to express our appreciation to you for convening this urgent meeting, the second within a week, which underscores the seriousness of the situation before us. I thank the Secretary General for his remark and his personal engagement toward peace and stability in the region. And we echo your call for dialogue and for ending the fighting. I also thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Madam President, Israel's attack against Iran is an unprovoked and unjustified act. It constitutes a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations. This is an attack on nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguard. If these guarantees, and even the presence on the ground of international inspectors cannot guarantee the protection of such installations, then the credibility of the entire nuclear non-proliferation regime is called into question. If those entrusted with upholding this regime are unable or unwilling to condemn and denounce such violations, they must ask themselves, what is their purpose? And are they truly fulfilling their responsibilities? We must resist any attempt to justify what in essence is an act of aggression against a sovereign member state of the United Nations. Any misleading narrative is unacceptable. As Director General Grossi stated in an interview with CNN, we, the IEA, did not have any proof of a systematic effort to move into a nuclear weapon, end of quote. These words merit our full attention. Madam President, it is imperative that everyone returns to a path of reason. Negotiation between the E3, the European three, and Iran. Negotiation between US and Iran with the facilitation of Oman remain a viable and a constructive option available for diplomacy. Algeria has always believed in the power of dialogue, and we echo the call of the Secretary General in this regard. Even in time of heightening tension, mediation and Charter's principle remain our unique, viable tools. Let me quote the Charter. All members shall settle their international dispute by peaceful means, end of quote. Madam President, international humanitarian law is clear. Nuclear power plant enjoy specific protection and shall not be made the object of attack. Attacks against such facilities are prohibited. If there remains a risk of radioactive material spreading from the impacted facilities, the potential danger extends well beyond borders, endangering civilian populations across the region. For my country, Algeria, there can be no double standard, no double standards when it comes to respecting international humanitarian law. Civilian and civilian infrastructure must be protected everywhere and under all circumstances. We have consistently warned against violation of international humanitarian law, notably in Gaza, where tragically violating IHL became the norm. Today, the same patterns of conduct are being repeated and repeated again. When we reiterate in the strongest term our condemnation of all violation of international humanitarian law, the protection of civilians is not optional. It is an obligation. Upholding international humanitarian law is a matter of preserving our shared humanity. However, those responsible for the collapse of the health system in Gaza, for the killing of 1,580 health workers, for the killing of over 18,000 children and more than 10,000 women, for the killing of 225 journalists, and for the killing of 467 humanitarian workers, cannot credibly claim to be upholding international humanitarian law. Madam President, no measures can substitute for the responsibility that rests with this Council. In 1981, following the Israeli attack on Iraq, remember, this very Council unanimously adopted Resolution 487. It's true, this resolution was never really implemented. And Israel's nuclear facilities were never placed under IAEA safeguards. And Iraq never received any compensation. And the Council, this very Council, was never properly informed of follow-up measures. This is to show that the legacy of impunity, the legacy of immunity, has dangerous consequences. What we are witnessing today is not simply an isolated act of aggression. It is a profound challenge to the very foundations of the international legal order. The Security Council must fulfill its mandate. Acts that threat international peace and security demand an adequate response. Inaction should not and cannot be an option. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, let me express my gratitude to Guyana for swiftly convening today's meeting at this critical juncture. I thank the Secretary General for his important statement and compelling message. I also appreciate USGT Carlo and IAEA Director General Grossi for their informative briefings. I reiterate our deepest concern over this dangerous escalation of conflict in the Middle East. despite the unanimous calls for maximum restraint during last Friday's Council meeting. We regret that Israel and Iran have continued to exchange attacks, putting the safety and security of their own people at grave risk. The government of the Republic of Korea condemns all actions that further aggravate the worsening situation. Over the past week, both Iran and Israel have carried out repeated and large-scale missile and drone strikes against each other's military assets and critical infrastructure, resulting in widespread destruction and a growing number of casualties, including many civilians. Should this vicious cycle of mutual retaliation persist, not only the peoples of Iran and Israel, but also millions of in neighboring states and beyond could face intensifying threats to their safety and livelihoods. The region's instability is also generating negative impacts on maritime security, as well as on global energy markets and supply chains, risking the economic security of the whole world. Madam President, in recent days, we have repeatedly heard the positions of both sides. What is important, however, is that all member states should respect the international law and the UN Charter, uphold the global non-proliferation regime, and work towards the promotion of international peace and stability. This is precisely the core mandate of the Security Council and the very reason we have reconvened here today. As repeatedly voiced in this chamber, the protection of civilians in armed conflicts is not optional. This is a legal obligation and a moral imperative we cannot afford to neglect. The indiscriminate use of explosive weapons in populated areas and on civilian facilities, including hospitals, must cease immediately. In addition, we reiterate concerns that attacks on nuclear facilities can have serious implications for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards. In this regard, we commend the IAEA's prompt establishment of a task force and continued reporting on the management of affected facilities. Appropriate assessments by the IAEA of potential risks, such as radioactive releases from further possible attacks on nuclear facilities, would be highly welcomed. Madam President, as a country that has long faced mounting nuclear and missile threats from its neighbor, the Republic of Korea does not view this situation as a distant issue confined to the Middle East. The international community remains unconvinced of the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program, and this issue should be clearly addressed. We must take the grave consequences of potential nuclear proliferation seriously. At the same time, we should recognize that military measures cannot be the ultimate solution to addressing proliferation concerns or securing long-term peace and security anywhere in the world. How Iran's nuclear issue is resolved carries significant implications for us all. We take note that the key parties have publicly maintained that they remain open to diplomacy. We sincerely hope that the talks among the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Iran in Geneva today will achieve a timely outcome to navigate through this precarious situation and open another window for diplomacy. The Republic of Korea implores all parties to exercise both wisdom and determination to urgently resolve these immensely tough challenges. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Secretary General, for your introductory remarks, and Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, and Director General Rafael Grossi for your briefings. DG Grossi, we commend the IAEA team for their professionalism in implementing the agency's critical responsibilities, especially during this complex and evolving situation. Colleagues, we meet at a decisive moment in the Middle East, convening amid an intensifying conflict between Israel and Iran. It is not too late for the government of Iran to do the right thing. President Trump has been clear in recent days that Iran's leadership must completely abandon its nuclear enrichment program and all aspirations of acquiring a nuclear weapon. The Iranian government has long posed a constant menace to the peace and security of its neighbors and the entire world, which this council is charged to maintain. The Iranian government has repeatedly called for Israel's destruction and for, and I quote, death to America. They have launched direct and proxy attacks on Israeli civilians, including most recently on southern Israel's largest hospital, and just recently, in the last couple hours, on Haifa. Israel's government has also spread chaos, terror, and suffering throughout the region. Iran's government has also spread chaos, terror, and suffering throughout the region. Let us not forget that the Iranian government was an enabling and ideological material force behind Hamas's deadly assault on Israel in October 2023. And it twice attacked Israel last year with hundreds of ballistic missiles. The Iranian government also encouraged its terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, to open a northern front from Lebanon and enabled Houthi rebels in Yemen to become a menace to global trade and freedom of navigation, and to launch long-range missiles endangering civilians in Israel. In January 2024, a drone attack from an Iran-backed terrorist group on a U.S. military facility in Jordan killed 3 American service members. Enough is enough. President, as the leaders from the Group of 7 stated earlier this week, Iran is the principal source of instability and terror in the Middle East. The G7 also reaffirmed the right of Israel to defend itself. While the United States was not involved in Israel's strikes, let there be no doubt that the United States continues to stand with Israel and supports its actions against Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran's leaders could have avoided this conflict had they agreed to a deal that would have prevented them from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. But they refused to do so, choosing instead to delay and deny. We can no longer ignore that Iran has all that it needs to achieve a nuclear weapon. All it needs is a decision from their supreme leader. That is unacceptable, and this council must urge them to change course. The government of Iran has nothing to gain by escalating their rhetoric toward the IAEA, launching missiles at civilians, threatening neighbors, or pursuing nuclear weapons. For too long, they have prioritized terrorism and their nuclear program above the well-being of their own people. Their resulting weakness is now on full display for the entire world. The Iranian government must abandon its nuclear ambitions so that there is no more destruction. Choose instead prosperity for their people. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señora Presidente. Saludamos y agradecemos al Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas, Su Excelencia Antonio Guterres, por su contundente mensaje en el que ha instado a ofrecerle una oportunidad a la paz. Extendemos nuestro agradecimiento a la Secretaria General Adjunta, Rosemary DiCarlo, y al Director General del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica, Rafael Grossi, por sus presentaciones, así como a las delegaciones aquí representadas que nos distinguen hoy con su participación. La reunión de hoy responde al llamado de la comunidad internacional a exhortar a las partes involucradas a adoptar medidas en dirección a la desescalada del conflicto, cuyo acelerado desarrollo aterra. Hemos sido testigos del lamentable despliegue de ataques que han causado la pérdida de vidas civiles, entre ellos mujeres, niños y niñas, convirtiendo a la población civil en la principal víctima de este conflicto. El Consejo de Seguridad tiene nuevamente hoy el deber de encontrar mecanismos a través del multilateralismo para construir una solución a este asunto, como se logró hace una década con la implementación de la Resolución 2231. Durante los últimos meses hemos podido observar cómo se desarrollaron numerosas rondas de negociaciones que tenían como objetivo encontrar una solución diplomática al programa nuclear de Irán. Tal como lo ha señalado el secretario general, la diplomacia, las negociaciones y el diálogo son las únicas vías para alcanzar soluciones, por lo que instamos a todas las partes a atender su mensaje para retomar un proceso de negociación genuino que permita avanzar hacia un acuerdo de conformidad con las normas del derecho internacional. No existen negociaciones ni acuerdos perfectos, pero es a través del diálogo serio y constructivo y del compromiso de que se pueden lograr avances significativos hacia soluciones justas y sostenibles. Asimismo, reafirmamos la misión del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica como el ente técnico competente encargado de verificar el cumplimiento de las obligaciones nucleares. Señora Presidente, estamos presenciando un conflicto en el que parece haberse desdibujado la distinción entre las infraestructuras críticas y los objetivos militares. Por ello, hacemos un llamado urgente y responsable a todas las partes a respetar el derecho internacional y el derecho internacional humanitario. Es fundamental proteger y cuidar a la población civil y garantizar el respeto a las infraestructuras críticas. En este sentido, recordamos que las instalaciones nucleares no deben ser atacadas bajo ninguna circunstancia, especialmente aquellas que ya se encontraban bajo el monitoreo y la verificación del OIEA en el marco del Plan de Acción Integral Conjunto. No podemos permitir que este tipo de acciones se vuelvan aceptables dentro de las normas internacionales. Los riesgos para la población civil son demasiado altos, ya que un incidente de esta naturaleza podría provocar la liberación de material radiactivo con consecuencias graves por contaminación radiológica para la población, para el medio ambiente y tener un impacto regional sin precedentes. En este momento crítico, resulta fundamental que este Consejo actúe con firmeza y coherencia, de manera que su acción se traduzca en credibilidad que garantice un cese inmediato a las hostilidades y el pleno respeto a los principios del derecho internacional. Gracias, señora Presidente.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council on the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. We thank His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his powerful reminder of this Council's responsibilities, as well as Mr. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, and Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, for their timely and insightful briefings. This request for this meeting underscores the gravity of the recent regrettable developments, coupled with the expectation that the Council, indeed its members, will enable the Council to discharge its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. We remain gravely alarmed by the ongoing military strikes by Israel against Iran, as well as the retaliatory strikes by Iran. These hostilities, which began on 13th June, have reportedly claimed the lives of senior Iranian officials, nuclear scientists, and civilians in both Israel and Iran, a toll we deeply find troubling. As we express grave concern regarding the attacks on Iran, we are equally disturbed by reports of strikes against or impacting civilian targets in Israel, including hospitals and emergency services, and in densely populated areas in clear violation of international humanitarian law. These hostilities have displaced families, damaged critical infrastructure, and disrupted essential services. Thousands face the urgent prospect of evacuation. Sierra Leone recalls the obligations of all parties under international humanitarian law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention, to protect civilians, medical personnel, and civilian objects at all times. We call for safe corridors for those seeking refuge, unimpeded humanitarian access, and close coordination with relief agencies to ensure the delivery of life-saving assistance. Swift humanitarian action is indispensable, yet it cannot substitute for political solution. The region needs restraint, responsibility, and credible diplomatic initiatives. Sierra Leone aligns itself with the Secretary General's appeal for the immediate de-escalation, renewed dialogue, and the exercise of maximum restraint. Statesmanship, not brinkmanship, is required. We are therefore heartened and fully welcome the meeting in Geneva today of the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, including the EU High Representative and the Iranian Foreign Minister, as part of efforts to ease this conflict. We believe this is a window of opportunity that clearly exists for genuine dialogue and peace to prevail. We recall the binding obligations under international humanitarian law. Article 56 of Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions prohibits attacks on works and installations containing dangerous forces, including nuclear, electrical generating stations, if such attacks may cause the release of dangerous forces resulting in civilian losses. The IAEA has also consistently underscored that the safety and security of nuclear facilities must never be compromised by military action. The ongoing hostilities risk triggering a disaster of unimaginable scale. Any military action that endangers nuclear facilities risks severe humanitarian consequences, irreversible environmental harm, and further regional instability with global repercussions. We therefore emphasize the need to safeguard and allow the full and unhindered implementation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which remains the cornerstone of the global nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses regime. The current conflict underscores the fragility of the international nuclear order and the urgent necessity to preserve the integrity of the NPT process. We call upon all states to recommit to the NPT's objectives and to engage constructively in dialogue within its framework. Our Council has a duty to ensure that tensions do not derail the NPT's vital role in advancing peace and security. We further urge support for regional initiatives, including a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, as envisaged in General Assembly and NPT review conference outcomes. We endorse inclusive diplomatic tracks aimed at restoring structured negotiations on Iran's nuclear program, the JCPOA, and addressing broader regional security concerns, including maritime safety and missile proliferation. Previous agreements, though imperfect, show that sustained engagement grounded in international law and mutual respect remains the surest path toward durable peace. We also support the impartial technical work of the IAEA. Full cooperation by all states, including Iran, with its monitoring and verification mandate is essential to ensure transparency, build confidence, and prevent miscalculation. We commend Director General Grossi for sustaining engagement under challenging circumstances. In closing, Madam President, Sierra Leone recalls the principle of sovereign equality under Article 2.1 of the Charter and the duty of member states to settle disputes by peaceful means under Article 33. We highlight Article 25, obliging states to accept and carry out Council's decisions, and Article 103, which establishes the supremacy of Charter obligations. The Council must speak with one voice in upholding the law and encouraging peaceful settlement. We welcome constructive efforts by regional actors and partners committed to the Charter. We encourage states with influence over the parties to use that influence and support non-military solutions, reinforce respect for international law. The human cost, environmental damage, and blow to economic stability from further escalation would be immense and long-lasting. Finally, Sierra Leone urges all parties to pause, de-escalate, and recommit to diplomacy. The eyes of the world are upon us, and history will measure us by the choices we make. Restraint, dialogue, and adherence to the Charter remain the guiding principles for a safer and more secure world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, nous avons écouté avec la plus grande attention Monsieur le Secrétaire général, qui a rappelé avec force la gravité de la situation. Et nous l'en remercions. Je remercie Madame la Secrétaire générale adjointe pour les affaires politiques, Madame Di Carlo, et Monsieur le Directeur général de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique, Monsieur Raphaël Grossi, pour leurs exposés qui donnent la mesure de ce qui justifie notre réunion d'aujourd'hui. Madame la Présidente, les frappes entre Israël et l'Iran se poursuivent depuis une semaine. Les victimes civiles se multiplient de part et d'autre. Hier, l'un des plus grands hôpitaux d'Israël a été touché par un missile iranien. Des frappes israéliennes ont également ciblé des infrastructures civiles sans lien avec le programme nucléaire et balistique iranien, et les informations transmises par le directeur général de l'AIEA quant à la situation radiologique de certains sites sont dans tous les esprits. Il est nécessaire de mettre fin urgemment à ces opérations militaires qui sont porteuses de lourdes menaces pour la sécurité régionale. La France appelle à la retenue et à la désescalade. Les vies civiles doivent être épargnées. Il faut retrouver le chemin de la diplomatie. Monsieur le secrétaire général l'a souligné, le cœur de cette affaire, c'est la question nucléaire. La position de la France est claire. L'Iran ne peut et ne doit pas se doter de l'arme nucléaire. L'obtention par l'Iran de cette arme marquerait d'abord une menace pour la sécurité d'Israël et de la région, que l'Iran déstabilise depuis des années en apportant son soutien à des organisations armées et des groupes terroristes. Un Iran nucléaire constituerait aussi une menace directe aux intérêts de sécurité de la France et de l'Europe. Cette menace est d'ores et déjà très concrète. Des otages d'État français sont actuellement retenus en Iran, et l'Iran livre des missiles balistiques et des drones iraniens à la Russie, qui sont utilisés dans sa guerre d'agression contre l'Ukraine. La France saisit cette occasion pour réitérer son appel à la libération immédiate de ces 2 otages détenus en Iran depuis plus de 3 ans dans des conditions inacceptables. L'accès de l'Iran à l'arme nucléaire représenterait une violation flagrante du traité de non-prolifération sur les armes nucléaires. Il conduirait à un affaiblissement grave du régime international de non-prolifération, dont ce traité constitue la pierre angulaire. Cela inciterait d'autres États à s'engager dans la course à cette arme dans la région et au-delà. Or, l'Iran a choisi de s'engager dans une escalade dangereuse de son programme nucléaire, malgré les appels au respect de ses engagements internationaux. L'Iran a accumulé un stock d'uranium qui excède très largement les limites de l'accord de 2015. Il a produit de l'uranium hautement enrichi à des niveaux qui n'ont aucune justification civile crédible. Il a installé des milliers de centrifugeuses avancées en excès par rapport aux limites de l'accord de 2015, y compris sur des sites où de telles activités sont proscrites par cet accord sur le nucléaire iranien, le JCPOA. Monsieur le directeur général de l'AIEA a déclaré dans un rapport publié fin mai qu'il n'était pas en mesure de garantir la nature pacifique du programme iranien. Le Conseil des gouverneurs de l'AIEA a constaté dans une résolution adoptée le 12 juin dernier le non-respect par l'Iran de ses obligations au titre du traité de non-prolifération. Nous sommes reconnaissants à l'AIEA de ses efforts sans relâche pour assumer ses responsabilités d'inspection et de contrôle en dépit des blocages et du refus de l'Iran. Nous respectons l'éthique d'impartialité, d'indépendance et de respect rigoureux des traités et de ses mandats dont l'AIEA fait preuve une nouvelle fois. L'objectif de ce Conseil doit donc être que l'Iran reprenne sa coopération avec l'AIEA et revienne au respect de ses obligations internationales. Une décision de l'Iran de sortir du TNP constituerait une escalade sans précédent. Mais notre responsabilité vis-à-vis des populations civiles qui souffrent, notre attachement au droit international et la mémoire des crises récentes au Moyen-Orient nous engagent. Il ne peut pas y avoir de solution militaire à la question nucléaire iranienne. C'est par la négociation que doit être recherchée une réponse durable à la menace de prolifération posée par le programme nucléaire de l'Iran. C'est la position constante de la France aux côtés de ses partenaires britanniques et allemands. C'est cette logique qui a permis l'accord de Vienne de 2015, dont nous avons toujours soutenu l'application malgré le retrait américain de 2018 et la cessation par l'Iran du respect de ses engagements en 2019. Les Européens du E3 ont recouru en 2020 au mécanisme de règlement des différends prévu par l'accord et déployé dans ce cadre des efforts diplomatiques inlassables. En 2021 et 2022, l'Iran s'est vu offrir 2 propositions d'accord révisées qui auraient permis le retour des États-Unis à l'accord et de l'Iran à sa pleine mise en œuvre. L'Iran n'a pas saisi ces opportunités. Cette année encore, la France, avec ses partenaires E3, n'a jamais cessé d'échanger avec l'Iran et souhaite que ces échanges aboutissent. En l'absence d'un accord qui réponde à nos intérêts de sécurité, la France, avec ses proches partenaires européens du E3, comme ils l'ont annoncé, prendront leurs responsabilités dans le cadre des dispositions prévues par la résolution 2231 du Conseil de sécurité. La France appelle aujourd'hui avec gravité l'Iran à saisir enfin la chance d'une solution diplomatique négociée tant qu'il est encore temps. Aujourd'hui même se tient à Genève, plusieurs d'entre vous l'ont relevé, une réunion des ministres du E3, de la haute représentante de l'Union européenne et de leur homologue iranien à cette fin. Alors que le temps est compté, la France, avec ses proches partenaires européens, est prête à débuter dès maintenant avec l'Iran une négociation diplomatique destinée à assurer que l'Iran ne se dote jamais de l'arme nucléaire et de nature à mettre fin à ce conflit. Il s'agit de s'entendre sur un accord robuste, vérifiable et durable, indispensable pour s'assurer du caractère exclusivement pacifique du programme nucléaire iranien. Des engagements clairs et concrets doivent être pris dès maintenant par l'Iran pour démontrer à la communauté internationale que Téhéran souhaite s'engager dans cette voie et que des résultats rapides pourront être atteints. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I start by thanking the Secretary-General, Under-Secretary-General De Carlo, and Director-General Grossi for your clear and sober briefings. The UK reiterates its full support for the vital work of the IAEA. We thank the IAEA Director-General and his staff for their continued professionalism, diligence, and courage in these complex circumstances. President, first, the United Kingdom is deeply concerned by the sharp escalation we've witnessed between Israel and Iran over the past week. This is a dangerous moment for the entire region, and further escalation is in no one's interest. Civilians must never be targeted, and we deplore the loss of civilian life and offer our condolences. All parties must protect civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. Restraint is vital to protect further regional escalation and loss of life. The United Kingdom supports Israel's need to protect its security and people. However, a return to diplomacy is urgent, and we have pressed this with both Israel and Iran. I also want to be clear that the UK did not participate and is not participating in Israel's strikes. We have deployed assets, including jets, to the region as a defensive and precautionary measure only. President, second, Iran's nuclear program is a significant concern. My Prime Minister has been clear, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. The IAEA's reports show that Iran's high-enriched uranium stockpile has grown to alarming levels. Iran's stockpile of 60% high-enriched uranium has no credible civilian justification. It is essential that Iran cooperate with the IAEA and bridge the trust gap that the Secretary-General spoke of. The IAEA and the Non-Proliferation Treaty are key pillars of international security. For many years, the UK, alongside our E3 partners, has sought a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear program. This commitment stands and has never been more urgent. Alongside E3 colleagues and the EU, we are engaging with Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi in Geneva today and using this window of opportunity to support a return to diplomacy and a peaceful resolution. Any further escalation, such as restricting IAEA access, diverting nuclear material, or increasing the production of high-enriched uranium, would intensify the threat to international peace and security posed by Iran's nuclear program. Third, military action cannot put an end to Iran's nuclear capabilities. We have strongly supported and continue to support diplomatic efforts to come to a deal. That is the only way to resolve the nuclear issue for the long term. President, our objective remains stability in the Middle East. A diplomatic solution is in the interests of all concerned. Even now, it is not out of reach. Now is the time for restraint, calm, and a return to diplomacy and dialogue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. Secretary General, thank you very much for your introductory remarks. USG De Carlo and DG Grossi, thank you very much for your updates and appraisal of the situation on the ground. Madam President, as we heard from the briefers, the situation continues to deteriorate rapidly and risks pushing the region toward the point of no return. We are deeply concerned with the Israeli strikes on Iran, as well as with Iran's retaliatory strikes on Israel. Slovenia condemns its military escalation and the unnecessary loss of civilian lives. We call on both sides to respect the UN Charter and international law, including international humanitarian law. We echo the Secretary General's urgent appeal to avoid the internationalization of the conflict. Slovenia calls on both sides to immediately de-escalate and agree to full and unconditional ceasefire. Madam President, Slovenia remains concerned about the size and unclear nature of Iran's nuclear program. These concerns are aggravated by the fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency, after many years, still cannot confirm or deny the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. However, no amount of precision strikes will make these concerns go away. We have no tolerance for proliferation of nuclear weapons, either for attacks against civilian nuclear infrastructure, whether it happens in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or anywhere else. Madam President, issues pertaining to Iran's nuclear program have always required a tailored diplomatic solution. JCPOA was a necessity, and when it expires, it will need to be replaced. With this in mind, we urge all parties to prioritize diplomacy and remain committed to a political process. We welcome the talks between the E3 and Iran taking place today in Geneva. These represent a much-needed stabilizing factor. To conclude, Madam President, the death and destruction in both Israel and Iran in recent days are raising the stakes, escalating the fighting and inflaming rhetoric in a region that has already endured more than its share of suffering. Our thoughts remain with civilians under siege in Gaza and the hostages who need to be released immediately and unconditionally. In such a volatile situation, it takes courage to de-escalate and commit to peace. I appeal to both sides to show that courage, to spare their own civilians and the Middle East as a whole from further bloodshed and destruction. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by thanking the Secretary General for his very important remarks. I also like to thank Under Secretary General Mr. Carlo and Director General Mr. Grossi for the informative and timely briefings. Madam President, since last Friday's emergency meeting, there has been a significant deterioration in the situation in the Middle East. Once a dreaded possibility, military escalation is now a reality. In this dangerous moment, allow me to make the following 3 points. First, we reiterate our call for immediate de-escalation and utmost restraint so as to end the vicious cycle of military action and violence. The international community must be urgently engaged in order to provide the necessary security assurances and a sustainable diplomatic endgame so as to avoid a regional or, worse still, a global conflagration. We fully support the Secretary General's appeal to all to avoid any further widening of the conflict, and we stress our commitment to regional security and stability, as well as support to any diplomatic initiative that will lead to a sustainable ceasefire. Second, Greece has repeatedly expressed, and does so again, its strong concern over the Iranian nuclear program. It is imperative to preserve the global non-proliferation regime as enshrined in the NPT, and Iran must comply with its legally binding safeguards obligations and can never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. Third and last, Greece has consistently supported Israel's right to protect itself. We also echo the Secretary General's condemnation of the tragic and unnecessary loss of lives and injuries to civilians and damage to homes and critical civilian infrastructure. A week into yet another conflict, it's now more important than ever to ensure that civilians do not keep finding themselves in the crossfire, especially given the nuclear aspect of the evolving crisis. We recall the obligation of UN member states to act in accordance with the Charter and international law. We consider of absolute priority the respect of international law and international humanitarian law. It is essential to uphold the UN Charter as regards the use of force, as well as the integrity of the global non-proliferation regime. Madam President, in closing, allow me to reiterate that de-escalation and a full and immediate ceasefire are now urgently needed as a first step towards a sustainable peace. The international community and countries of influence must step in and offer a diplomatic way out to both parties. We are looking forward to a positive outcome of the meeting taking place today in Geneva between the foreign ministers of the E3, United Kingdom, France, Germany, the High Representative of the European Union, and the Foreign Minister of Iran. The stakes are simply too high for regional and world security, and failure is not an option. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Somalia.
Madam President, thank you for your timely leadership in convening this meeting. We appreciate the remarks of the Secretary General and briefings provided by USG Di Carlo and Director General Grossi on the rapidly evolving situation in the Middle East. The situation arising from reported Israeli airstrikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran on 13 June 2025 and Iran's subsequent response is a matter of great concern. These actions represent a perilous escalation that threatens to engulf the entire region in an uncontrollable cycle of violence, suffering, and pain. We strongly condemn any acts of aggression that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states. Such actions are in clear contravention of the fundamental principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, particularly Article 2 and Paragraph 4, which unequivocally prohibit the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. We believe that all member states share a responsibility to act in accordance with these commitments. We emphasize the necessity of respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, adhering to the principles of good neighborliness and settling disputes through peaceful means. Madam President, Somalia urges all parties to work towards de-escalation, to achieve a comprehensive ceasefire, and to restore calm and hope. Our delegation expresses deep concern about this dangerous escalation, which threatens grave consequences for regional peace and stability. The spillover of these hostilities imperil countless lives and threaten to deepen existing crises. Somalia strongly reaffirms the urgent necessity of establishing a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, applicable to all states in the region without exception, in accordance with relevant international resolutions. We also stress the need for all Middle Eastern countries to join the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a step towards regional and global security. We emphasize the paramount importance of protecting civilians and civilian infrastructure, as well as refraining from targeting nuclear facilities that are under International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards in line with Security Council resolutions or decisions. Such acts constitute a violation of international law and international humanitarian law, including the 1949 Geneva Convention, and pose unacceptable risks to civilian populations and the environment. At this critical stage, Somalia calls for a swift return to the path of negotiations as the only viable means to reach a sustainable agreement regarding the Iranian nuclear program. We further emphasize the importance of safeguarding the freedom of navigation in international waters in accordance with international law and urge all parties to refrain from actions that undermine maritime security. Madam President, the complex challenges before us demand a collective and measured response grounded in dialogue, mutual respect, and the search for the common ground. Our delegation reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism and the principles of the United Nations Charter. We urge all parties to act with responsibility and wisdom, placing the well-being of the region's peoples above all other considerations. It's important to seize this moment to redouble our efforts for de-escalation and to support a diplomatic process that can deliver peace, stability, security for all states in the Middle East. Finally, my delegation stands ready to engage constructively with the international community to advance these shared goals. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also thank the Secretary General for his important introductory remarks, and Under-Secretary General Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for their detailed briefings and urgent messages here this morning. Madam President, as underlined by the Secretary General, the recent escalation in the Middle East has once again brought the region dangerously close to the brink of a region-wide conflict. The repeated attacks between Israel and Iran are cause for great concern and pose a grave risk to international peace and security. We must do our utmost, individually and collectively, to respond to this threat and to prevent further destabilization. Together with the European Union and many others, we join the call for maximum restraint and immediate de-escalation. We urge all parties to abide by their obligations under the UN Charter and international law and to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. We deplore the loss of civilian lives and unacceptable attacks on civilian targets, including the recent hospital attack. Furthermore, all actions should be taken and the necessary restraint shown to reduce the risk of nuclear accidents. Denmark's view is clear. Diplomatic engagement and a negotiated solution, with the IAEA playing a vital role, remain the only viable paths toward lasting peace in the region. Denmark supports all diplomatic efforts to restore stability and return to the negotiating table to seek a solution to the Iranian nuclear issue. And we welcome the E3 foreign ministers and the EU's meeting with the foreign minister of Iran in Geneva today. Madam President, we have been clear that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. Denmark has repeatedly expressed our concern about Iran's escalating nuclear trajectory. The fact that the IAEA is unable to provide assurances that the Iranian nuclear program is exclusively peaceful is deeply disturbing. We are further alarmed that Iran is non-compliant with the legally binding nuclear safeguards obligations as recently determined by the IAEA Board of Governors. There is no plausible civilian reason for Iran's production and stockpiling of highly enriched uranium. We strongly urge Iran to cooperate with the IAEA on the outstanding safeguard issues and to return to the negotiating table to secure an agreement with the international community which ensures that Iran's nuclear activities are exclusively peaceful, an agreement which upholds the global non-proliferation norms and which fosters lasting stability in the Middle East and beyond. Madam President, in closing, let me reaffirm Denmark's urgent call for de-escalation, for all sides to refrain from steps that could lead to serious regional consequences. In the face of mounting civilian suffering and at the risk of a spark that ignites a wider conflict, this is imperative. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Guyana. I thank you, Secretary General, for your remarks and for your untiring efforts at peace. I also thank Under Secretary General Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for the very important updates provided. Colleagues, the recent escalation between Israel and Iran poses an immediate threat to the security and stability of an already volatile region. The effects of this conflict could extend far beyond its immediate borders, exacerbated by the non-compliance with international law. Sadly, regional and international peace and security are now both under threat. Guyana took note of Israel's letter of 17th of June 2025, in which the Council was informed of Operation Rising Lion, aimed at, and I quote, neutralizing the existential and imminent threat from Iran's nuclear weapon and ballistic missile programs, end of quote. We also took note of Iran's letter of 18th June 2025, in which it, and I quote, reserves its right to self-defense, to protect its sovereignty, territorial integrity, the Iranian people, and its vital national interests, end of quote. While acknowledging these letters, we urge both Iran and Israel to exercise maximum restraint to avoid plummeting the region into deeper crisis and dangerously close to a nuclear catastrophe. We also urge both parties to adhere to their obligations under international law, the UN Charter, and the relevant Security Council resolutions. We emphasize that a state's right to self-defense does not absolve them of their responsibilities and obligations under international law, including human rights and humanitarian law. Colleagues, the Middle East has long endured a fragile stability, constantly threatened by geopolitical tensions and unresolved conflicts. As the war in Gaza continues, this new escalation threatens to shatter the delicate balance, igniting a wider regional conflagration with unimaginable consequences. It risks drawing in more actors, further entrenching cycles of violence, and making a peaceful resolution increasingly elusive. Like the Secretary General, Guyana firmly believes that dialogue, diplomacy, and adherence to international law are the only pathways to sustainable peace in the region. We call on all parties to immediately cease hostilities, de-escalate tensions, and return to the path of diplomacy. The root causes of this escalation must be addressed with urgency, and the parties must work towards a comprehensive and lasting political solution that respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states in the region. Colleagues, Guyana is also concerned about the possible humanitarian consequences and reiterates its call for all parties to respect international humanitarian law, particularly the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, and to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Media reports indicate that over 200 persons have already been killed in Iran and at least 24 in Israel as a result of the escalation. It is important to ensure that more civilian lives are not lost. Finally, Guyana takes positive note of the meeting in Geneva today with the E3, UK, France, Germany, the EU, and Iran. We also reaffirm our commitment to supporting any Security Council measure aimed at preserving international peace and security. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Security Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we express our sincere appreciation to you, Madam President, for convening this urgent meeting at our request. We welcome the presence of the Secretary General and in this meeting, and thanks for his introductory remarks. We also extend our gratitude to Under Secretary General Ms. Di Carlo for her valuable briefing. We thank Algeria, Pakistan, China, and the Russian Federation for supporting this meeting and for their clear condemnation of Israeli brutal attacks. Madam President, on 13 June, Israel launched a large-scale unprovoked military attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Civilian cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Tabriz, and Kermanshah, were deliberately targeted. The strikes were planned and systematic, killing senior military officials, scientists, professors, students, doctors, artists, athletes, rescuers, and ordinary civilians, including women, children, and infants. Many died in their sleep. These children killed in their bed. Hundreds of civilians have been killed and thousands injured. The aggression continues. On 16 June, Israel attacked Hakim Children's Hospital in Tehran, Farabi Rehabilitation Hospital in Kermanshah, and Iranian Red Crescent Society building and medical ambulances. These are only a few instances of the brutality and gross violation of international humanitarian law by Israeli regime. At least 2 pregnant women and their unborn children were killed. On the same day, Israel struck the national broadcasters IRIB during a live broadcast, killing journalists and humanitarian workers. Just today, Israeli regime inflicted damage to 2 other hospitals in Iran, endangering the lives of patients and medical personnel. Up till now, 5 hospitals have suffered from heinous attack of Israeli regime, along with physicians and humanitarian personnel who have been killed or injured. There were not accidents, there were not collateral damage, they were deliberated war crimes, acts of a state terror, and example of barbaric warfare. Madam President, Excellencies, and colleagues, Israel also attacked Iran's peaceful safeguard nuclear site and facilities. On 13 June, it struck the uranium conversion facility and the fuel plate fabrication plant. On 18 June, it targeted centrifuge production sites in Tehran and Karaj, both under IAEA monitoring. On the 19th June, it attacked the Arak heavy water reactor built under the JCPOA term and IAEA safeguard with no proliferation risk. These attacks violate the UN Charter, international law, the IAEA Statute, and Security Council Resolution 2231 and 487. Israeli strikes are an assault on the global non-proliferation regime. Security Council Resolution 487, which was adopted unanimously, clearly states that any military attack on the safeguard nuclear facilities is an attack on the entire IAEA safeguard system and the NPT itself. The Security Council must implement its resolution. If the Council fails to act now, it will send a message that international law and resolution apply selectively. If the non-proliferation regime collapses, this Council will share responsibility with the Israeli regime. Madam President, despite Iran's repeated warning about the threats of our peaceful nuclear sites and facilities, the IAEA Director General has failed to act. His silence undermines the agency's authority, neutrality, and credibility. The IAEA cannot remain silent while safeguard facilities are attacked. This inaction must end. Israel openly declared that it will continue this strike for as many days as it takes. We are alarmed by credible report that the United States, as a depositary of NPT, may be joining this war. Any such support violates the NPT and undermines global security. The selective invocation of international law by US, France, using it when convenient, discarding it when it constrained their allies, is a form of institutional hypocrisy that gravely undermines the credibility of this Council and the international law. Let me be clear. Iran's nuclear program is peaceful and under the world's most extensive IAEA inspections. Iran has long advocated for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. Israel is the only possessor of undeclared nuclear weapon in the region. It refused to accede to the NPT and block regional disarmament efforts. Madam President, Israeli aggression violates the UN Charter. It breached the basic principle of prohibition of the use of force. It violates Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It violates international human rights law and targets innocent civilians and threatens the right of life and security of our people. This regime committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and state terrorism. It attacks on safeguard nuclear facilities, set a dangerous precedent for global security. Madam President, the already dire situation has been exacerbated by mounting and irrefutable evidence of direct involvement by the United States in this illegal war of aggression. The US has publicly threatened to strike Iran's safeguard nuclear facilities. Such acts constitute a flagrant violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter and a breach of the sovereign equality of states. These reckless statements and actions emanate from the head of a state who is a permanent member of this Council and entrusted with primary responsibility for international peace and security, and an irresponsible behavior. Madam President, Iran has exercised its inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Our response has complied fully with international law, including humanitarian law. We have taken all necessary precautions to protect civilians. Iran will continue to exercise this right as long as the Security Council fails to discharge its primary responsibility under the Charter and until the Israeli aggression is fully and unequivocally terminated. The Security Council must act now. We reiterate our call on the Security Council to determine the Israeli illegal use of force and armed attacks against Iran are a breach of peace and act of aggression. Adopt binding and enforcement measures under Chapter 7 to halt the aggression and prevent its recurrence. Condemn clearly the violation of Iran's sovereignty and targeting of our safeguard nuclear facilities. Address the risk of wider regional war, especially the unlawful involvement of a third country. Madam President, the lies and fabrication used by representatives of Israeli regime and its Western allies don't work anymore to whitewash and justify its horrendous crimes. International law is clear. There is no right for Israel to commit this act of aggression, no right to attack and target civilian infrastructure or safeguard nuclear facilities, no legal or moral cover for war crimes. The so-called preemptive attack and existential threat claims used by this terrorist regime and its allies to justify aggression have no basis in international law, and to conduct acts of aggression, kill innocent people, and violate the territorial integrity of states. These are false excuses for Israeli aggression. Iran has never initiated any war, while Israel, as an occupying and terrorist regime, has a long and dark history of illegal use of force, violation of all legal international norms, assassination, and nuclear secrecy that destabilize the entire region. The selective use of international law by certain members of this Council expose dangerous double standards that endanger international peace and security and undermine the credibility of this body. Without the support and protection of certain Western states, especially the United States, Israel could not have been able to commit this aggression with such impunity. This complicity must be recorded by history. Finally, Madam President, Council's failure to act at this critical juncture would constitute a profound abdication of the Council's responsibilities and a grave betrayal of fundamental principles of the United Nations. Inaction will embolden the aggressor, undermine international law, and send a message of dangerous impunity to the world. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Israel.
Madam President, I would like to thank the Secretary General, USG De Carlo, and Director General Grossi for your remarks. Madam President, before I begin my remarks, I must address the representative of the Islamic regime in Iran, Mr. Iravani. How dare you? How dare you write 5 letters in the last week, come before this Council, demand a session, and ask the international community for sympathy? How dare you ask the international community to protect you from the consequences of your own genocidal agenda? Have you no shame? For years, your supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has publicly and repeatedly called for the destruction of Israel and the United States. In May 2024, he declared, and I quote, "The divine promise to eliminate the Zionist entity will be fulfilled." In May 2025, he said, and I quote, "The Zionist regime that is a lethal, dangerous, cancerous tumor should certainly be eradicated, and it will be." These statements are your regime's policies. Your government has attempted the assassination of Prime Minister Netanyahu. It attempted the assassination of President Trump. Your operatives have plotted to attack Jewish communities and kill Israeli civilians across the world. Now, with innocent blood still dripping from your hands, you come here asking for sympathy. You demand protection from this Council while plotting the extermination of my people. It's enough. Enough with the performances. Enough with the theater. How can this Council allow the representative of a regime that funds, arms, and orchestrates terror across the world to come here and play victim? It's like a wolf complaining when the shepherd fights back to protect his flock. So innocent. Mr. Iravani, please clarify to us. Do you support the destruction of Israel, a UN member state? Do you support the assassination of our elected leaders? If you do not, say so. We are all here, waiting. This Council should put an end to this charade, once and for all. Mr. Iravani, you are not a victim. You are not even a diplomat. You are a wolf pretending to be a diplomat. And we are done pretending otherwise. Madam President, on Wednesday night, Iran launched a ballistic missile directly at a hospital. And by the way, I listened to your word. You mentioned that we attacked hospitals. I ask you to provide a list of the hospitals that Israel attacked in Iran. We know what we are doing. If we attacked hospitals, show us the locations, show us the names and the list. Iran launched a ballistic missile directly at a hospital, Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, the largest hospital in southern Israel. It was struck by a precision-guided missile fired by the Islamic Republic of Iran. This hospital serves over 1 million people, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Bedouin. It is a vital provider of emergency and trauma care. Iran hit it in purpose. There was no military bases around, no mistakes, leaving those million people with severely reduced access to medical service. This was not a misfire. This was not a mistake. Iran has proven its ability to strike strategic targets with accuracy. This was a deliberate act. It is a blatant violation of international law, a war crime, and a calculated attempt to murder the most vulnerable. Let this Council understand what that missile really signified, that no one is safe, that if Iran will target a hospital with a ballistic missile, it will target anyone, anywhere, with anything they have. Today it was Beersheba. Tomorrow it could be Brussels. Soon it could be Boston. Iran is rapidly expanding its ballistic missile arsenal. Today its longest range missiles can travel over 2,000 kilometers. That already puts Eastern Europe in range. But Iran is not stopping there. Iran is developing missiles with a range of over 4,000 kilometers. That would place every European capital, London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, within striking distance. And when that milestone reaches, what comes next? New York, Washington, the US entire East Coast. Before Israel took action, that reality was approaching faster than you could imagine. Council members, do you believe that such a regime will hesitate to threaten entire populations with nuclear armed missiles? Can you guarantee? Especially a regime which chants death to America, death to England, death to Israel, and so many others. Because that is where the world was heading. Israel is stopping it. Iran has already enriched uranium to near weapons-grade levels. It cannot be denied. We saw the reports. It has built deep underground facilities designed to survive bunker-busting bombs. It has advanced missile delivery systems. And it has lied to the IAEA and the world at every step. There must finally be an acknowledgement that there is no greater threat to international peace and security than a nuclear Iran. The Soroka strike of our hospital should end any illusion that this threat is theoretical. Iran is not just building the capability, it is using it. We will never allow those capabilities to go nuclear. While the Ayatollah shout death to America and death to Israel, many on this council dismiss those threats. While Iranian missiles fly, the UN urges restraint and de-escalation while ignoring Iran's nuclear ambitions altogether. That weakness, that detachment from reality, that hypocrisy is what allowed Iran to get as far in its nuclear program as it did. It is what allowed Iran to sow chaos across the world. And let's analyze it for a minute. The Iranian regime has exported thousands of drones which have killed many civilians. It has harmed Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, extremist groups in Syria and Africa, and criminal networks in Latin America and Europe. It's a war machine, stretched all around the world. Its reach is not limited by borders, its hatred is not limited by reason, and its ambition is not limited by geography. We have already seen the consequences. Terror attacks in Argentina, Iranian agents uncovered in European capitals, proxy missile strikes on Gulf states. This is Iran's vision for the world, and it's happening in real time. Right now, Israel is the focus point for that murderous vision. Just yesterday, Iran launched another ballistic missile, this time carrying cluster munitions at a densely populated civilian area in central Israel. Cluster munitions are designed to spread multiple explosions over a wide area. It deliberately fired these munitions at civilians. Iran's intentions could not be clearer. Bloody murder. 29 civilians have been killed and almost 900 wounded by Iranian missiles. The only reason the number isn't higher is because of Israel's advanced defensive capabilities. So yes, Israel acted because we understand the cost of waiting. We will not wait for another threat, whether that is rockets, missiles, terrorists, or an atomic bomb. Israel acted as a last resort. This was the final window of opportunity to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, and it came only after diplomacy had been exhausted. Israel cannot and will not accept this situation. Operation Rising Lion was launched to neutralize an imminent and existential threat, and we are doing so in full compliance with international law. Israel is strictly following the law of armed conflict, including the rules of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in attacks. That's why I'm waiting for the report about the hospitals. Our strikes are aimed at military objectives based on reliable intelligence. Every measure is taken to minimize harm to civilians. Iran launches indiscriminate barbaric missile attacks. They deliberately target population centers. This is the difference between a democracy acting in defense of its people and a brutal regime targeting civilians. Colleagues, it is Israeli civilians running for shelter now, every day. But something many of you also seem not to understand is that when Israel acts, we are not only defending our people, we are defending yours. As German Chancellor Merz said, and I quote, Israel is doing the world's dirty work. We are the first target, but we will not be the last. We are holding the line between civilization and genocidal jihadist imperialism. Iran doesn't just want to destroy Israel. It wants to remake the world order. One missile, one terror proxy, one destroyed hospital at a time. So no, we do not apologize for defending ourselves. We do not apologize for striking Iran's nuclear facilities. We do not apologize for neutralizing the threat, because while some here raise their voices when Israel strikes a ballistic missile site, they fall silent when Iran strikes a surgical wound. Some condemn us for destroying a drone factory, but say nothing when Iran hits a residential building. That is not balance. That is moral collapse. We are doing what this Council should have done long ago. We are acting where the international community hesitated. We are stopping a threat that endangered the entire world. Though our homes, our families, and our children are under threat, we will not stop. Not until Iran's nuclear threat is dismantled. Not until its war machine is disarmed. Not until our people and yours are safe. This is not just Israel's fight. It is the world's fight, and if no one else will fight it, we will. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I wish to take this opportunity to remind all speakers that this is a formal meeting of the Council, and as such, the need to ensure the proper decorum and proper language, we should always aim to refrain from personal attacks. I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
شكرا جزيلا السيدة الرئيس، ونعرب عن امتناننا لحضور السيد الأمين العام لهذه الجلسة ومطالبته بأهمية احتواء هذه الأزمة والدعوة إلى العودة إلى المفاوضات وإدراكه بتبعاتها. كما تقدم بالشكر إلى السيدة وكيل الأمين العام والسيد مدير عام الوكالة الدولية على إحاطتهما. وأود أن أعرب عن تقدير جمهورية العراق لجهود مجلس الأمن في متابعة التطورات الخطيرة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط، والتي تشهد تصعيدا غير مسبوق نتيجة استمرار الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية على الجمهورية الإسلامية الإيرانية وانعكاساتها على الأمن الإقليمي والدولي، ويدين بأشد العبارات الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية غير المبررة ضد جمهورية إيران الإسلامية والانتهاكات الإسرائيلية المتكررة لسيادة الدول، ولا سيما لاختراقات المجال الجوي العراقي لغرض شن عدوان على الجارة إيران، والتي تشكل انتهاكا صارخا لمبادئ ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي، وتعديا سافرا واستخداما غير مشروع وانتهاك لأجواء دولة ذات سيادة في شن أعمال عدوانية ضد دولة جارة أخرى عضو في الأمم المتحدة، وتبعاتها التي أدت إلى تفاقم حالة عدم الاستقرار في المنطقة ويعرض أمنها لمخاطر جسيمة. وأجبرت العراق على اتخاذ قرار الغلق الاحترازي لأجوائه، والذي ألحق خسائر اقتصادية بقطاعي النقل والسياحة، فضلا عن أضرار إنسانية نتيجة تقطع السبل بالمسافرين وغلق المطارات. ونؤكد هنا رفضنا القاطع لأي انتهاك للسيادة العراقية، وندعو إلى الكف الفوري عن هذه الخروقات غير المقبولة، ولن نسمح أن يكون العراق ساحة لتصفية الحسابات الإقليمية والدولية. وقد قامت حكومة جمهورية العراق في هذا الصدد بتوجيه رسالة شكوى رسمية إلى رئاسة مجلس الأمن بتاريخ 13 حزيران الجاري أوضحنا فيها تفاصيل هذا الانتهاك. السيد الرئيس، واليوم وقبل انعقاد هذه الجلسة بقليل قامت 50 طائرة حربية إسرائيلية باختراق المجال الجوي العراقي وحرمة أراضيه وسيادته، قادمة من الحدود السورية الأردنية، وعلى وجبتين، الأولى 20 طائرة والثانية 30 طائرة باتجاه جنوب العراق، محلقة فوق مدن البصرة والناصرية والنجف وكربلاء. فبالإضافة إلى ما تشكله هذه الخروقات للقانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة ولسيادة العراق، فإنه أيضا يشكل تهديد للمناطق المقدسة، وهذا يؤدي إلى ردات فعل شعبية لما تحظى به هذه المواقع المقدسة من مكانة عالمية. السيد الرئيس، لقد حضر العراق مرارا ومنذ بداية الحرب على قطاع غزة من تداعيات استمرار هذه الحرب وتوسيع رقعة النزاع وتؤجج التوترات الإقليمية، وتعرض الأمن والسلم الإقليمي والدولي للخطر، ولم تتخذ في حينه وحتى يومنا هذا أي تدابير توقف هذه الحرب ورفع المعاناة عن الشعب الفلسطيني، الأمر الذي شجع قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على ارتكاب المزيد من الجرائم ومحاولتها توسعة رقعة الحرب والتصعيد وجر المنطقة إلى صراع إقليمي، وهذا ما حذرنا منه سابقا. ونؤكد اليوم هنا أن استمرار العدوان الإسرائيلي على جمهورية إيران ينذر بتحويل المنطقة إلى ساحة صراع شامل، مع ما يحمله ذلك من عواقب كارثية على شعوب المنطقة وعلى الممرات المائية الدولية وغلقها، وتأثير ذلك على أسواق الطاقة والوضع الاقتصادي العالمي. كما أن استمرار الحرب وتوسيع رقعتها الجغرافية أو دخول أطراف فاعلة جديدة فيها ينذر بتحولها إلى صراع إقليمي شامل يهدد استقرار المنطقة بأسرها، وستكون له عواقب وخيمة على شعوب المنطقة كافة بما فيها الدول التي لم تكن جزءا من النزاع المباشر. وأن ما يزيد من خطورة الموقف هنا أن هذه ليست المرة الأولى التي يجتمع فيها مجلس الأمن لمناقشة الإجراءات العسكرية التي يقوم بها الكيان الإسرائيلي ضد الدول ذات السيادة ومنشآتها النووية. فكلنا نتذكر بوضوح قرار هذا المجلس الموقر 487 لعام 1981 وتقرير مجلس محافظي الوكالة الدولية في حينه واصفا الفعل الإسرائيلي أنه ضربة لنظام الضمانات الشامل للوكالة ولنظام عدم الانتشار، وعلى إسرائيل أن تخضع منشآتها النووية لنظام الضمانات والانضمام إلى معاهدة عدم الانتشار NPT بهدف إنشاء المنطقة الخالية من الأسلحة النووية وجميع أسلحة الدمار الشامل الأخرى في الشرق الأوسط، كما أن الانتهاكات الجارية تتزامن مع وجود مسارات تفاوضية دبلوماسية قائمة، حيث يشكل التصعيد العسكري الحالي ضربة قاصمة لكل الجهود السياسية المبذولة ويعيد المنطقة إلى مربع المواجهة في وقت نحن بأمس الحاجة فيه إلى تعزيز لغة الحوار وتغليب منطق العقل، ونشجع الوكالة الدولية للطاقة الذرية بتنفيذ ولايتها الفنية. السيد الرئيس، يواصل العراق بصفته رئيسا للقمة العربية جهود الدبلوماسية الإقليمية والدولية، ودعا إلى عقد اجتماع طارئ لوزراء الخارجية العرب لتنسيق المواقف، كما إننا نعمل بشكل وثيق مع منظمة التعاون الإسلامي لتوحيد الرؤى والمواقف بهدف نزع فتيل هذه الأزمة الخطيرة واحتوائها وإنقاذ الأرواح وضمان عدم انزلاق المنطقة إلى حرب شاملة مدمرة وتجنب نتائجها، خاصة في ظل الاستهداف المتكرر للمنشآت النووية والتي قد تؤدي إلى تسربات إشعاعية كارثية تتجاوز حدود الدولة المستهدفة وتشكل تهديدا مباشر طويل الأمد لحياة الإنسان والبيئة في الدول المجاورة ومنها العراق. ختاما، السيد الرئيس يدعو العراق مجلس الأمن إلى ممارسة مسؤولياته في حفظ السلم والأمن والقيام بما يلي: أولا، التحرك العاجل للمطالبة بوقف فوري لإطلاق النار ومنع أي تصعيد إضافي وتجنيب المنطقة مزيدا من الدمار وعدم الاستقرار. ثانيا، إدانة الخروقات الجوية وانتهاكات السيادة، خصوصا تلك التي يتعرض لها العراق ودول الجوار. ثالثا، دعم المسار الدبلوماسي لإنهاء الأزمة وتفادي أي إجراءات تزيد من التدهور والعودة إلى طاولة المفاوضات وتفعيل آليات الوساطة الدولية. رابعا، حماية المنشآت النووية والبنى التحتية المدنية والتحذير من استخدامها في الصراعات. خامسا، منع أي تصعيد قد يؤدي إلى تعطيل حرية الملاحة الدولية والنقل الجوي وتعطيل خطوط إمدادات الطاقة تفاديا لأزمة طاقة عالمية. وشكرا جزيلا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدة الرئيسة، السادة أعضاء مجلس الأمن، أود في البداية أن أشيد بمشاركة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة والمسؤولين الأمميين في هذه الجلسة. أعود أمامكم اليوم للحديث مجددا نيابة عن دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي لأؤكد الموقف الثابت والواضح لدولنا، وهي الإمارات العربية المتحدة، مملكة البحرين، المملكة العربية السعودية، دولة قطر، سلطنة عمان، وبلادي دولة الكويت، حيال الأحداث الخطيرة التي تشهدها منطقتنا. السيدة الرئيسة، إن المجموعة الخليجية تجدد إدانتها للهجمات الإسرائيلية على الجمهورية الإسلامية الإيرانية ومنشاتها النووية، وتؤكد خطورة تداعيات هذه الاعتداءات على أمن المنطقة واستقرارها، وتعتبرها انتهاكا صريحا لمبادئ القانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة، وتقويضا للجهود الدولية الرامية لتحقيق السلام والتهدئة. وتواصل دول مجلس التعاون مساعيها الدبلوماسية المكثفة على أعلى المستويات لخفض التصعيد وتجنب اتساعه، من منطلق الحرص على تغليب الدبلوماسية والحوار كخيار وحيد بعيداً عن لغة المواجهة والتصعيد. وإذ نستشعر خطورة المرحلة التي تمر فيها المنطقة، نؤكد أن استمرار هذه الأوضاع المتدهورة قد يؤدي إلى عواقب كارثية وتفاقم من حدة التوتر، الأمر الذي يهدد بتقويض فرص الحل الدبلوماسي والسلام المنشود. وفي ظل هذه الظروف الدقيقة والحساسة التي تستوجب منا جميعا اليقظة والحكمة، تدعو المجموعة الخليجية إلى ممارسة أقصى درجات ضبط النفس ووقف الأعمال العدائية فوراً لتجنب المخاطر وتوسيع رقعة الصراع والعودة إلى مسار الحوار والمفاوضات، باعتباره السبيل الأمثل والوحيد لتجاوز الأزمة الحالية وضمان استدامة الأمن والاستقرار الإقليمي والدولي. كما تدعو المجموعة الخليجية إلى أهمية أن يتحمل مجلس الأمن والمجتمع الدولي مسؤولياتهم نحو الوقف الفوري لهذه الحرب ومنع التصعيد والدفع باتجاه مواصلة المفاوضات الأمريكية الإيرانية بشأن الملف النووي الإيراني بواسطة سلطنة عمان. السيدة الرئيسة، تجدد المجموعة الخليجية أيضاً تأكيدها على ضرورة احترام سيادة الدول والالتزام بالأسس والمبادئ الأساسية المبنية على ميثاق الأمم المتحدة ومواثيق القانون الدولي ومبادئ حسن الجوار وعدم التدخل في الشؤون الداخلية والامتناع عن استخدام القوة أو التهديد بها. وتشدد على الدور المهم للوكالة الدولية للطاقة الذرية في تعزيز الأمن الوقائي ومنع استهداف المنشآت النووية، لما في ذلك من مخاطر جسيمة على المستويين الإنساني والبيئي، ويعد تهديداً للسلامة ولنظام الضمانات الشاملة، كما يخالف كافة القوانين الدولية والإنسانية. وتشدد المجموعة الخليجية في هذا السياق على أهمية الحفاظ على الأمن البحري والممرات المائية في المنطقة والتصدي للأنشطة التي تهدد أمن واستقرار المنطقة والعالم، بما في ذلك استهداف السفن التجارية وتهديد خطوط الملاحة البحرية والتجارية الدولية والمنشآت النفطية في دول المجلس. وفي الختام، تحث المجموعة الخليجية المجتمع الدولي ومجلس الأمن بشكل خاص على اتخاذ إجراءات سريعة وفعالة لاحتواء هذه الأزمة ودعم جهود الحوار الدبلوماسي بما يحفظ أمن وسلامة شعوب المنطقة ويجنبها مخاطر المزيد من التصعيد. وشكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Señora Presidenta, la República Bolivariana de Venezuela tiene el honor de hacer el uso de la palabra en nombre del Grupo de Amigos en Defensa de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Conscientes del mandato encomendado a este órgano, tal y como se establece en la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, al tiempo que reiteran su inquebrantable solidaridad para con el pueblo y el gobierno de la República Islámica de Irán en estos difíciles momentos. Señora Presidenta, en respuesta al atroz ataque de Israel contra la República Islámica de Irán, iniciado el pasado 13 de junio del 2025, los Estados miembros del Grupo de Amigos en Defensa de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas emitieron un comunicado especial el día 14 de junio del 2025, en el que expresaron su categórica condena y su denuncia en los términos más enérgicos posibles a estos ataques coordinados a gran escala que aún hoy siguen ocurriendo contra múltiples lugares de Irán, lo que ha provocado la muerte de cientos de civiles, entre ellos mujeres, niñas y niños, así como científicos iraníes, profesores universitarios y altos mandos militares, algunos de ellos juntos con miembros de sus familias mientras se encontraban en sus hogares. Los Estados miembros del Grupo de Amigos en Defensa de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas condenan enérgicamente los ataques deliberados de Israel contra civiles y zonas pobladas por civiles donde residen millones de personas. Destacan que los ataques persistentes, sistemáticos y generalizados contra mujeres, niñas y niños, la imposición de graves lesiones corporales y los ataques militares contra zonas residenciales, bienes y propiedades civiles por parte de Israel a lo largo de la región, incluidos sus recientes ataques contra la República Islámica de Irán, ponen de manifiesto una vez más el total desprecio de Israel por cualquier ley o norma y la premeditación en la comisión de crímenes brutales. De igual forma, condenan los ataques deliberados contra altos funcionarios y científicos iraníes y denuncian además los ataques israelíes contra la instalación nuclear de Natanz, uno de los emplazamientos iraníes que opera bajo las salvaguardias y la supervisión plena del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica. Expresan su profunda preocupación por el hecho de que estos ataques brutales y los daños resultantes de ellos plantean riesgos considerables de liberación de material radioactivo, lo que supone una grave amenaza para la población civil y el medio ambiente, al tiempo que expresan su preocupación por el hecho de que los ataques israelíes siguen poniendo en peligro la seguridad de la aviación civil en la región. Señora Presidenta, el Grupo de Amigos en Defensa de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas subraya que estos ataques reprensibles constituyen una violación flagrante de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, los principios fundamentales del derecho internacional, incluidos la soberanía, la integridad territorial y la prohibición de la amenaza o el uso de la fuerza contra la integridad territorial de los Estados, así como del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos, al tiempo que viola gravemente los derechos fundamentales, en particular el derecho a la vida y el derecho a la salud. Con mayor razón, estos atroces ataques constituyen una violación flagrante del artículo 2.4 de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, entre otros. Advertimos contra la aquiescencia y la omisión de las Naciones Unidas y la comunidad internacional ante los persistentes ataques brutales de Israel en la región. Y recordamos que la inacción y la falta de medidas contra tales violaciones graves por parte de Israel erosionarán el Estado de Derecho en el plano internacional y socavarán la credibilidad del sistema multilateral, al tiempo que terminarán por normalizar la comisión de nuevos crímenes atroces, algo que sin duda es claramente inaceptable. Subrayamos que tales violaciones flagrantes de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y los continuos ataques brutales por parte de Israel, que constituyen graves amenazas para la paz y la seguridad regionales e internacionales, deben ser condenados de manera inequívoca por todos, incluyendo por este Consejo de Seguridad. Subrayamos también que la aplicación de un doble rasero y la selectividad en la defensa de los principios del derecho internacional, incluida la prohibición del uso o la amenaza del uso de la fuerza, solo socavarían la integridad y los propósitos de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, sentando un peligroso precedente de ilegalidad. Señora Presidenta, el Grupo de Amigos en Defensa de la Carta destaca, además, la responsabilidad del Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas en la defensa de los propósitos y principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, al rechazar el uso deliberado y flagrante de la fuerza contra la República Islámica de Irán, así como la del Director General del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica, en la promoción de la seguridad y la protección de las instalaciones nucleares y la preservación de la integridad del mandato del Organismo Internacional de Energía Atómica, denunciando los ataques israelíes contra las instalaciones nucleares pacíficas iraníes. Los Estados miembros del Grupo de Amigos en Defensa de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas expresan su profunda preocupación por los continuos crímenes cometidos por Israel para provocar y desencadenar conflictos en la región del Medio Oriente, como lo demuestran sus reiteradas y graves violaciones del derecho internacional, juntos con sus provocaciones y violaciones contra los países de la región. Hechos que ponen de manifiesto su intención de agravar las tensiones sobre el terreno y su responsabilidad por las consecuencias resultantes de ello. Para concluir, quisiéramos enfatizar las obligaciones que tienen todos los Estados, en virtud del derecho internacional, de abstenerse de prestar ayuda o asistencia deliberada a Israel en la comisión brutal de crímenes atroces contra la República Islámica de Irán y cualquier otra nación de la región, al tiempo que destacamos, por una parte, el derecho inherente de la República Islámica de Irán a la legítima defensa en virtud del derecho internacional y, por otra, la urgente necesidad de que la comunidad internacional exija a Israel que rinda cuentas por todos sus crímenes contra el pueblo palestino y la región en su conjunto. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
I thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Madam President, we expressed from the day one our deepest concern at the dangerous escalation that threatens to destabilize the Middle East following Israeli strikes on Iran and Iran's response. Today, we reiterate a strong commitment to regional security, including the security of the State of Israel, and call on all sides to abide by international law, show restraint, and refrain from taking further steps which could lead to serious consequences such as potential radioactive release. The European Union has always been clear that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon and is concerned about the IAEA's recent report, based on which the IAEA Board of Governors found Iran in non-compliance with its legally binding nuclear safeguards obligations under the NPT. But lasting security is built through diplomacy, not military action. We believe that diplomacy must prevail. The EU spares no effort to reduce tensions and to find a lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, which can only be through a negotiated deal. Madam President, we, both EU member state ministers and the EU High Representative, have taken numerous bilateral contacts since the start of the conflict with all stakeholders, including phone conversations with our Iranian counterparts, to call on Iran to take decisive steps to return to negotiations and pave the way for a diplomatic solution. In this vein, the High Representative and the E3 ministers are meeting as we speak in Geneva the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs. The meeting began this afternoon and it is ongoing. We will continue to engage for de-escalation, and in view of a lasting solution, we're going to be the only solution bringing peace and hope to the region. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Secretary General for his sincere and guiding statement. I also thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Turkey condemns in the strongest terms the recent attacks conducted by Israel against Iran. These strikes constitute a manifest violation of the UN Charter, in particular the fundamental obligation on all member states to refrain from the use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state. We view the rapid escalation now unfolding across the Middle East with profound concern. Hundreds of lives have already been lost, and the risk for further bloodshed is alarming. Moreover, a wider regional collision will aggravate the risk of nuclear or radiological spillover and mass displacement, disrupt global trade and transportation routes, and imperil energy security at a moment of acute volatility. As a neighbor of Iran, Turkey reiterates the imperative of de-escalation, leading to an immediate ceasefire and a return to diplomacy. In that regard, we will fully support the Secretary General's call for maximum restraint and stand ready to assist all efforts aimed at halting the violence. Madam President, Israel's deliberate strikes against safeguarded nuclear facilities in Iran are unprecedented. They contravene international law, the statute of the International Atomic Energy Agency, relevant IAEA resolutions, and a Security Council resolution. These attacks must immediately stop. By targeting such installations, Israel has consciously placed nuclear safety and security at grave risk, with possible radiological dispersion that would endanger human health, biodiversity, and environment far beyond Iran's borders for decades to come. The IAEA's verification activities inside Iran have already been impeded. It is also deeply troubling that a non-NPT state, which maintains deliberate opacity regarding its own nuclear capabilities, is attacking the nuclear infrastructure of an NPT state under safeguards. This recklessness strikes at the heart of the global non-proliferation regime, compelling all of us to reflect upon its wider repercussions. The international community, especially this august body, must therefore unite in urging Israel to accede to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear weapons state and to accept robust IAEA verification. At the same time, concerns regarding aspects of Iran's nuclear program should be resolved through dialogue and strengthened cooperation between Iran and the agency. Turkey has consistently underscored that a diplomatic process remains the only viable route to settle the nuclear dispute and has supported and facilitated efforts toward that end. We continue to believe that diplomacy is the sole sensible path forward, and we call on all actors in a position to do so to exert their utmost efforts in this direction. Madam President, beyond the immediate nuclear risks, the security ramifications of this conflict are extensive. Energy security, which is inseparable from the national security, is now under severe threat. Strikes in one of the world's most sensitive regions for oil trade risk supply shortages and extreme price volatility, while the resulting uncertainties undermine long-term investments in vital infrastructure in the region. Hostilities have already disrupted sustainable transport, pushing up container and shipping costs and straining global supply chains. The destruction of urban areas and the natural environment further threatens biodiversity and jeopardizes regional and global sustainable development objectives. Madam President, we must not allow the crisis in Gaza to fade from the international agenda in the shadow of these latest events. Israel's assault on Iran cannot obscure the ongoing crimes being committed against the Palestinian people. Indeed, Israel's continued occupation of Palestinian territory remains the root cause of many conflicts across the region. A just, lasting, and comprehensive peace is attainable only through the recognition of an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. International community must therefore press with urgency for an immediate cessation of hostilities in Gaza and Iran alike, and redouble efforts to implement the two-state solution. Imposing peace is no longer a mere option. It is an imperative to preserve the credibility of the UN system and to safeguard the international law. Failure to do so will only fuel a vicious cycle of violence and war. Madam President, this Council must act collectively and decisively to prevent further escalation. The risk of wider conflict, forced displacement on a massive scale, and irreversible environmental harm demands our immediate attention. Turkey stands ready to contribute constructively toward any initiative that will de-escalate tension, restore the ceasefire, and relaunch credible, meaningful diplomacy. Let us seize this moment to reaffirm our shared commitment to the UN Charter, to the global non-proliferation regime, and to the principles of peaceful dispute settlement. Only by resolute adherence to these norms can we hope to avert catastrophic consequences for the Middle East, for the international community, and for next generations. Madam President, I touched on the spillover effects and displacement in Iran. Of course, UN staff is not immune from that. To the knowledge of this Council, 45 UN staff has been evacuated to Turkey from Iran. This shows also that this Council must act. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.